Dr. Bettina Wolf, who is also the co-founder of the Artemis Film Festival. Dr. Bettina Wolf.
Sorry I had to cut that out. That's my favorite part. It's funny that he's referring to a joke that happened right after that section. I had some emails from people that saw the film when it was first released, and they had these people, a few circumstances where they were in the audience and people got to the left, or they were saying this is communism. And right when that came up, they were just dumbfounded because their criticism was so predictable. Bizarre. If you haven't seen the rest of the film, there's a point where it goes right after this where the audience stands. I'm sorry. Want me to explain the joke to you?
Yes. That is the first question.
It requires
the joke. For those who have not seen the entire film.
Right at the end of this section, there is a new title sequence, and then it cuts to this screen of that city system, and then you hear the narration begin, and I'm speaking like this, and suddenly you see the shadows stand up from in this booking, as though if you're in a movie theater, like you'd see like a bad bootleg, you know, when someone stands up and walks in. And that's where I got the idea. They start screaming at the screen, screaming at the narrator, calling the communist, the Marxist, or New World Order, or all the things that I've recently heard, of course, the past 2 years, at least, that are objections to this complete prima facie associations, no critical thought to what defines those terms. They just throw out the labels because if you're talking about a system, say, I don't know, where people share resources, boom, you're just a Marxist and a communist. There's no larger order of thought. So I just made fun of that.
Or if you talk about science, you're a Scientologist.
Yes.
So
people draw all sorts
of... accused of that right from science?
Well, not directly, actually. No one's actually accused me of that. Scientologist, really? I've never heard that before. Am I a Scientologist?
It's best if you don't know all the things you're being accused of.
Oh, good.
I just find out about them and tell them to you when I see you. Or you were accused of this and you were accused of... I'm just not going to tell you that anymore.
Okay, thanks.
I'll just tell you about the great t-shirts. I still want these leaderless movement. Next time we're getting a dozen t-shirts and we're giving them out to the audience. A leaderless movement. So yes, please, let's go ahead and get started with our questions. Our second question this evening. The gentleman right in the front who was raising his hand even back at the very first Q&A that we had.
Okay, hello, my name is Karan Shreer. I have two questions. One is a very quick yes or no question, and the other is, my first question is, it says the society becomes very well managed by trees that they will never see the shade or something like that. My first question, yes or no, do you believe that you're doing that? Do you believe you'll see this come to pass before you do it?
Well, there's no static this. This is all evolutionary, and it will undergo great change. I think in my lifetime, as it has been, I've seen tremendous advancement, at least on a cultural value level. You've seen the world slowly come together and become smaller with the internet. You've seen some vast dismissals of separation concepts, whether it's racism or classism. There's all sorts of changes. The Occupy movement, I've never, ever in my lifetime thought I'd necessarily see a rise up against really what was a rise against the system, even though they didn't comment that way, but about the inequality. And most of the people in the Occupy movement weren't necessarily of the worst means either, but they recognized the problem so intently, given the mass distribution of wealth. I never imagined that we'd have a world type of reaction like that. So I'm even open. I don't know what to expect to see. I think it could happen very easily, very rapidly, but the barrier of the establishment systems and this self-appointed guardians of the status quo, and those that actually do have the power, of those serve as a very massive consequence. And I can't tell you how it would unfold in a way that would overcome those without conflict, unfortunately. Not to say violent conflict, but conflict of idea, conflict, turmoil that would exist between institutions, you know what I mean. So with all of those barriers, I easily can rationalize not seeing any type of larger fruition of this, especially if we really, if war becomes what it could become with the state of technology and everything else. We could very easily destroy large pockets of humanity rapidly. Disease epidemics that are not properly taken care of because of failures of the system, failures of sanitation, failures of the infrastructure. That's how far down we go first and how fast we can pick up the pieces, and hopefully the breakdown that we talk about will not actually really take hold of the effect where we have to rebuild and climb up out of so much, you know.
My second question, really quick, question. Obviously you've done a lot of research and looking into these and you know your facts. Is there any, you mentioned suppressed technology, is there any suppressed technology that you find particularly interesting that would revolutionize, whether it's Nikola Tesla, like his free energy, or smooth science and how
Yeah, that opens up a whole vat. One of my biggest interests, actually, apart from a unique singular technology, is trend analysis of prior technologies. So if you look at trend analysis, especially with the exponential increase overall of information technology, how that spreads out into the creation of mechanistic technology or whatever genre you want to consider, if you look at where we came from, what we have now, only 100 years into industrial civilization, really, we've only really been doing the type of technical feats we have for the past 100 years. Just imagine how insanely technologically advanced we could be within 200 years from now, especially given the exponential move. So off the cuff right now, the biggest problem is energy, really, even though it's not getting as much attention as it really needs. It's being clouded. And that's the most advanced element. With Nikola Tesla, Warcliffe Tower, the ability to not have infrastructure problems where you don't need the cables to run. You can do wireless electricity, which has been shown in TED Talks now. It's all there. And I'm dumbfounded when I go and look at what's actually happening. Recycling protocols, things that can easily be organically created for packaging. Simple stuff, but in the long term, reduce pollution, so many-fold. It's just unbelievable elimination of landfills. My head spins wild when I think of all the things that I've seen that if the intention was there, if it was implemented, put into a system, of course, how incredible it would be. But energy right now is the biggest concern. And there's no energy shortage, there's no energy problem in theory. It's only the established energy system. So.
The lady in the back with the striped shirt, right there. Please rise, give your name. Again, please everyone state your name and speak as quickly as you can. Keep your questions as short as possible, and speak loudly and clearly so we can hear you.
Hi, I'm Erica. Thank you for here, and I'm also a observer. I actually have two things. The second one, I prepared the question, it's too short. The other one just kind of spurs the conversation about the movement. And this is directed at everyone. I think I've seen this in typical ISCO. Joe Rogan did this in an interview. People tend to do this in a lot of ways to make happen. And it's tried to make this movement bigger out here. And I think one of the most important things is to not do that. We're getting from the others not occupy movement is to not have it here.
Fearless movement.
Together and solve it.
It's more of an issue of practicality in this case.
It's more about practicality than any other.
Absolutely, it's just a suggestion, but I think that's why this has been created in that way. But just,
sure.
And you can comment on that if you want.
Actually, I would like to make a quick comment on that. It really is about practicality. At the end of, this is the first time we've done the event, the Artemis Film Tour here at Columbia University, and the first time we've had Peter Joseph and one of the ZEITGEIST films here at this location. But the very first time, actually all 3 times that we've shown your film in Los Angeles, he will be on stage for 1-2 hours. I remember the very first Q&A we had with him, it was 1:30 in the morning and nobody wanted to go home. And then afterwards he came, off the stage and was in the courtyard speaking to everyone who was there as well. So it's just, for practical reasons, it would be a lot easier to be here and answer your questions with a microphone than be, seated on the first row trying to answer everyone's questions without a microphone and without a platform for everyone to be able to view us and ask us questions. So I just wanted to make that point.
Moving forward, I think that there can be a change.
Sure, there's tons of fun ways to eliminate those cult of personality or those elitist issues. My favorite example was during the first Bolshevik Revolution, it's nothing to do with communism at this point, the values were so hot then of not having people in charge that the orchestras, and since I came from an orchestral background, I thought this was amazing, the orchestras fired their conductors, and they just turned their ensemble towards each other and looked at each other and played without conductors, without any authority leader figure. And that was beautiful, and I appreciate that a lot. But I'll just say this, one of my biggest pet peeves is being seen in any type of larger way. I can't stand that. My new tactic now is to threaten self-imposed exile. This is what I do very frequently now. I say, listen, I might just drop this tomorrow. You know, if anyone looks at anybody else in the leadership role, it doesn't mean that authority doesn't exist. Every time you go to a dentist, you're giving up thoughts with authority. Someone who's done research. I think people should respect each other for the work that they've done to learn certain things. It doesn't mean that they are the guru or they are the only person. It's all data. It's all data. So I'm irrelevant. It's only my probability and ability to put these things together and achieve interest, but that is not even really me. That's conglomerate. Right.
It's a domino effect. It's basically, that's what it's all about.
Right.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
I can read it right off. I want to start talking about families and what they will look like in a resource-based economy. For example, the resource-based economy suggests that there ideally would be no ownership of the property or material goods, as if cards is one of the examples we've given. However, we tend to think of our relationship as monogamous, which causes our relationship partners to become property. In my own study of human sexuality, it's my understanding that this causes the human emotion of jealousy to become unnecessarily exaggerated. So in a model that leaves human beings as the only commodity to be individually owned, I believe human emotions like jealousy may persist and will replace money as the new crux of crime and conflict.
That's a good comment.
But I'm still wondering if your thoughts are
So what are your thoughts?
I think
Thank you. Thank you.
There's no universals in respect to how people become jealous or how people think about their monogamous or non-monogamous relationships across the whole spectrum of human society. It's really hard to see or to tell whether we truly are a monogamous or non-monogamous species. There's plenty of examples in the counterculture, if you will, people live very peaceful lives with, say, 2 husbands or something to that effect. So, I would say, first of all, there's no universal element there, and I think it's more of a byproduct of the system of property that we have holistically that we consider ownership and the ring and the whole process, and it's all traditionally derived, because of the need to reproduce. There's these social establishments that have been made to make sure, and probably actually is based on making sure the kids are taken care of when we knew who produced these kids. All of that aside, though, property issues in a resource-based economy doesn't mean that there's no ownership outright. It means that it's access rather than ownership. Ownership becomes elusive. What does it mean to have something that you need and to make sure someone doesn't take it? You don't want someone to take it, they won't take it, because they have access to it too. So it's non-ownership in the sense that there's enough abundance made and enough respect inherent in the system that people will have no need to do. They can't resell it. It's reinforced, as opposed to today where it's the exact opposite. Now everything is being stolen across the board, and business itself is a theft process inherently, and that can't work. So everything that we see from the spectrum of crime is the same kernel of the same trend, whether it's extreme greed in Wall Street or it's just some kid stealing a bag of gum. So I think I understand your question. I don't necessarily think it would lead to violence. I think there's no 100% universals, there's no utopia. So people getting along and people adapting, if people get in conflict because of their spouse or issues, interpersonal issues, which are usually value derived anyway, that lack of understanding. If I was in a relationship and she went and cheated on me, well, that's her decision. I might be upset by that, but that has nothing to do with me. That's her decision. That means the relationship and that formality is over. That was the causality of it. People aren't mature enough, unfortunately, to think that way. So you have bar fights, all these things reinforced, all of our television shows are all about infidelity, all the movies are about someone getting revenge, and all this stuff is so reinforced. Can't tell you how many friends of mine have had problems like that, and they won't blame the person that was, quote, cheating, they blame the other party, which is even more interesting than me. It's very common. Very common. It's amazing. So to argue it's human nature and that these things will persist, I think is not too hard to slip. I think it could easily be more civil and more mature. Thank you.
I'm actually going to select you right here. I'm just going to pick people that, if you already had a chance to ask a question before, please don't take it personally. Like, give an opportunity to other people who have not had the opportunity to ask a question. Please, your question.
My name is Joe. My question is pretty simple. With impending economic collapse, what are common folk like ourselves supposed to do to protect our assets and our family's well-being?
And therein lies a massive paradox of thought. At what point does your self-need, self-interest need, override the social concern? At what point does the social concern need override your self-interest? That's why, as I mentioned earlier, self-interest needs to become social interest in the broadest scheme for things to work out and not face the horrors that we face today. Obviously, in the breakdown, if you have a lack of resources, you're going to have conflict. If you have destabilization, which is upon us now with unemployment and all these other things that are happening, will probably push people to be more self-preserving and even more criminal as it moves forward. That's just terrible. I couldn't tell you. You have to make up your own mind and walk that line, where you maintain your self-preservation and also realize that the larger society needs you there to care after it, because it comes down and affects you anyway. You know what I mean? That's the paradox of thought, and I grapple with that all the time. Like, what if I completely ran out of money, or I was evicted, or at what point would I continue with this, for example? How could I possibly do that? And
Yes, basic survival and the fight or flight
Yeah.
response, basically.
And it doesn't mean we can overcome it. We can think it out, but if things get really bad, I definitely am in fear for the consequences, because it's going to reinforce those lower reptilian reactions. It's unfortunate.
But it's important to know about it and be aware of it and what we are probably facing if we don't try to change it.
Right. So you walk the line and you try to balance your life. What's that? You're not on your own. I mean, if there's anything that can happen socially, which I think will, for example, the Roosevelt administration, which he was deemed the worst socialist in America, they also tried to do a fascist overthrow of him, if you remember. He knew that he had to bring in a socialist concept in order to recover from the Great Depression. He did all of these very intelligent social things, many flaws otherwise, but they did very well with that. That's probably what's going to happen with any new presidency if they really want to maintain any social stability. There will be some type of implemented social stuff that will begin to take care of people, because they know that their power is in jeopardy if they don't. Because that's the source of every major revolution. The masses, huge divide, masses get really angry, and boom, there's the overthrow. That's usually violent, unfortunately. So students of history will recognize that, especially the political theorists that are in power, and they'll begin to throw bones, if you will. It certainly won't be enough. It's not going to take care of everybody, but that's the best you can hope for as far as the establishment is concerned. As far as your own work, you have to get activist-oriented and begin to spread this information and hope an organized way to slowly dismantle this system can work. And that's all I can hope for. I wish I could give you more fluid information. Use your own thought process for that. Transition will emerge with everyone thinking about what's possible based on where we are at that point in time.
The lady in red, right over here. You can please rise.
Hi, my name is Mika, and I wanted to ask you about, you said that in this next revolution, whenever it comes, what do you think will happen to the people on top? The people who are stubborn, as you said, with their money. Do you think that they will be killed or thrown? I just want to know what your personal opinion of
I don't advocate any form of violence, of course, but I'm not naive to history. I'm not naive to see what happens when you push people into a corner, and with the various empires and their fall, and the revolts that have happened almost periodically, almost predictably. One stat I'm working on right now is to try and gauge certain nuances of inequality that have existed in other empires or other civilizations historically, to figure out where the breaking point was. That's what I'm curious about. That aside, though, the people in power, the 1%, if you will, I think that I think their sense of being will be compromised. I think that they will start to feel so horrible for what the system has been fortunate for them. They'll lose that sense of entitlement. They'll lose everything when they realize that it's not just them and their family anymore, it's their whole community that's suffering, even though they might be okay. You know what I mean? I think that there will be a humane revolution of thought amongst those that can justify having, tens of billions of dollars, which they don't need. So that's all I can really hope for. Otherwise, I think the rest will be guilted, or the rest will probably be, in the worst case scenario, have the fate of many other revolutions that have occurred in the past. It's been one big class warfare if you look at it. The history of human society is the history of class warfare, whether it's called racism, whether it's called xenophobic creed bias, and I think these patterns will continue to recycle themselves as these class wars continue, unfortunately, until a larger system that supports this new balance emerges.
The gentleman all the way at the end, please.
Hey, my name's Eric. I just want to say thank you for all your movies.
I'm sorry, can you please state your name and speak much louder so we can hear you?
My name's Eric. I just want to say thank you for all your movies, and I think they're phenomenal. In your first movie, you discuss religion and how it's a form of control on all of us. I'm just wondering what your opinion was as far as, do you think it's possible for mankind to move forward while we still have archaic systems of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam in place? Thank you.
I see, it's a great question. I get that a lot. Religious thought is intrinsically stifling. It's intrinsically dogmatic. It's the same as the economic thought. And I consider, as I mentioned earlier, the economic system to be a religious form of thought. Now, I'm not talking about religion in the sense of philosophy, in the sense of what people draw their values from. I'm talking about the fact that it's an assumption of stasis, of development and meaning, and origin, and the unfolding in patterns in society. So, for example, in the Bible it says, "You will always have the poor among you." Well, that's a pretty bleak thought, isn't it? That's a pretty bleak thing to split in the seed. It makes it much easier to justify walking over that homeless person in New York, even if you're a deep Christian. You believe in equality for all, paradoxically. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's very hard when that question is brought up. But I would hope that the values that really underlie most religions, which are of good nature, it's not the practice, don't get me wrong, it's history of violence in religion naturally, but at the very core, which is why at the beginning of this film, by the way, I had a Christian preacher, if you remember, the Back in the Box speech. And he's a well-known Christian preacher that his values are much more in line. He doesn't promote any of the dogmas of the religious thought in the Christian religion. It's all about the things of the Jesus New Testament character that were positive. That's his values being projected into the Bible and him communicating that, basically. And that's great. And that's what you hope for. But simultaneously, it's exhausting when you realize how many people live with a very, very old worldview and with tremendous amounts of fear because of that worldview. And I don't talk about it very much. I'm glad you brought it up. But I think a very big part of this revolution of thought will be a more science, emergent-oriented thing. And invariably, that means most religions, as they exist, at least the dominant ones, will need to take a different place. It's bad enough we still have governments like Saudi Arabia that have religious law, and they're doing such atrocious things. I mean, the fact that that still exists blows my mind. Just goes to show, in the words of John Fresco, we're right at the end of the Dark Ages. Right. That's where we are. We're still there in the Dark Ages, eventually inching out into an age of reason, we hope. But thank you for the question.
The gentleman all the way at the end, please. If you can rise, sir, state your name and your question.
My name is Martin, and my question has to do with this countdown clock of depletion resources, specifically potable water. I heard you mention something about 200 or 300 years hence, where scientists are speaking about decades, it seems, will really be in very dire straits in terms of potable water, where our glaciers and other things, and you may know more about it. I wonder what your comment is when they speak about 10 or 20 years, where cities like Los Angeles and other cities throughout the world can expect severe shortages of potable water.
Yeah.
Talk more about what we call the water wars, which is the next wars being fought over water, which are films that we've also screened in our list as well.
There's a lot of great documentaries on that too. No, I completely agree with you in what you basically outlined. Yes, I think the basic foundation, air, water. If you look at China, some cities in China, it's like smoking packs of cigarettes just walking through these cities. In fact, just as a brief joke, I remember the presidential candidates recently were talking about the EPA. You know, the EPA was getting in the way of the market system and employment, and they got to reduce these restrictions on good public health and the environment because it's interfering with the jobs market apparently. And it was just such an amazing distortion of thought. It's like, let's just keep polluting so we can get more jobs. But that is the fundamental premise of thought. That's the logic of reason why everything's neglected now. So it doesn't surprise me at all in 10, 20 years to see what kind of water shortages and the consequences of those water shortages are. It's bad enough that none of us have clean tap anymore, and that bottled water is just atrocious as far as pollution. Not to mention the exploitation of other cultures in Fiji and other things that are happening, other resources. So it's just one more element of this system, another nail in the coffin, as it will. I had a joke I did in a radio show. I imagine eventually people are going to have designer gas masks. So you're going to have your like Pokemon gas mask, your Versace gas mask, and everyone's going to be pining over their next gas mask because that's what they know in their materialism. They justify it, and they don't seem to care the fact that all their environment is so polluted that they need it.
Rockaware.
And if you take that train of thought forward and go back, say, 60 years, actually, take it backwards, they would be laughing at us if they knew that we had bottled water for the majority of our consumption. They'd be like, what? How did we accomplish that? It's amazing.
Stupid.
The lady in the front, please.
I have a question, just curiosity, is that if everything works the way that you described in the Earth, the Earth, and everything is mechanized, then what would be the function relegated to the human? What would humans be dedicated to? What would we do other than
Enjoy life.
like that now, other than the frameworks we have now? What would we be dedicated to? What would our energies and
I love that you're asking that question because that's the seed right there. Is if we weren't doing all of this, what could we do?
Most people don't have the luxury to think that way. Yes.
perpetuate in that positive way, and that it doesn't start beginning to grow seeds of negativity and talk about it.
Well, the word freedom comes to mind. The biggest buzzword in this culture with the Western-dominated values and all its elusiveness has been, of course, freedom and democracy stored there somewhere. But freedom, this concept of freedom, when you walk into a private dictatorship, as it were, from 9 to 5, into a corporation that probably doesn't actually have a social service, that's the argument I use when I describe this to people, and what freedom do they assume? I'm getting to your question. I always at some point says to me,
struggle with that every day because I have to do a lot of different things. And every time I always come to a crossroads, what am I going to do next?
sure. And I think in this system, it compounds us so much, and it diminishes our sense of creativity. I know for me, I remember leaving music school and getting a job in advertising for the next, I believe, 8 years. I don't remember anything. It was like this blasé thing, sitting in an office and just slowly, my brain's rotting. It wasn't creative per se. It was mundane and arbitrary, and I knew it. And it just defeats you. How many people retire and then they die?
A lot.
I know.
One of the things I don't have to prove it, and I fight with people about it all the time, is I said I believe in quality of life. I don't believe that I've been projected to the future.
Sure.
And then, have an expectation of life that I don't know anything about, and have the mind in a current state of happiness to try to project a better life later on.
Sure. And I think when you look at kids, kids are full of ingenuity, full of creativity, they're full of interest, they're full of curiosity, and I think that's robbed out of us. So to answer your question, I think people will find a whole new level of interest. And as far as the social role, I think that people will begin to be basically the designers of new technologies, in part with the design revolution and artificial intelligence. They will work with machines using an optimized set of brain functions as opposed to working on a subway restaurant line, which I can't believe they still do in this conveyor belt. I mean, if you want to waste your life,
I think it's very important for humanity, and we're all conditioned in a system that we don't have the luxury to actually oftentimes live a meaningful, purposeful life. And when people, for example, have produced, if you want so, and then all of a sudden when they're like 60, 70, to my disappointment, or sometimes 80, 90 years old in the United States and work, it's just, okay, so now you're retired, so what am I going to do? And a lot of people get very depressed. And besides, just not having a meaning to get up and go on. So what do I do? Most people don't have the luxury to think about why am I here? What is my purpose? How do I relate to my neighbors, to my community? How do I matter? And I think all these values which you have addressed and you're addressing with your, with the ZEITGEIST movies and the movement, I think it's so important for humanity that we have much more meaningful lives, support each other, and be more creative and use science to just make our life easier. And just be collectively of purpose instead of the programs and files and machines.
Cogs in the wheel.
Which is actually, I think, just deteriorating to humanity.
It's ultimately heartbreaking.
It's insulting.
Yeah. The gentleman over here who's been dying to ask a question.
Hello, Peter. Yes, I'm ZEITGEIST.
Yes, I know.
And your name, please, your name, and please state your name and your question.
My name is Darryl Fritz. I want to first thank you for your movies. And the movement, actually, I've definitely met some of the most intelligent, forward-thinking folks that I've ever met, so thank you for that. I have two things I kind of wanted to address. One was the whole leadership conversation. I've spent a lot of time with the Occupy movement. I would like to say that although I love that movement as well, it certainly in no way, shape, or form has proven that leadership is not necessary in terms of the things that it's doing. I do feel like in some ways what you're saying about leadership and the way in which it's approached in both this and the Occupy movement kind of denigrates it in some ways. Because to be honest with you, if you were just showing social pathology and Project Earth here tonight, and you were still in LA, there'd be dead silence because even crickets would show us, sure. So I mean, I feel like if you say something on the ZEITGEIST page, it's going to have a lot more effect than if I say.
I'm aware of that. Go on.
And then the second part of my question was that the resource-based economy is essentially a community. Like it's a city. You're talking about on a city scale, but I mean to get the proof is in the pudding type stuff. It's just a basic community. I think if you do that for somewhere between 250 and a million, you get like the start of one of those communities. But one of the things that Occupy certainly is to show is that if you demonstrate an alternative lifestyle that actually works, it self-replicates in a number of different cities, and then if you get it on the building level in a bunch of different cities, you're going to have a city in pretty short order.
I agree. That was something that was proposed by the ZEITGEIST Project for years. The test city, as it were, wasn't necessarily going to be a community, but it was going to be something that would display the mechanics of the city and why it had such merit. And Josh's idea back then was that it would be picked up and bought, so to speak, even the monetary system and implemented by different countries. And that's possibly doable, but the problem is to really harness all the efficiency capabilities we have. It's beyond the scope of money, in fact. All the primitive things that are talked about here overall, like the 3D printing of homes, that's just the tip of what's really possible if we look again at the exponential increase of this type of technology, if the energy is put forward to make it happen. Not just one guy at USC who's working with no budget, who can barely get anything done, is trying to do this. He's promoting mainly for homes for homeless people, low discount housing. It's so cheap to do, it's so efficient. But that's not really where its place is. My point being is that no way you can afford true, sustainable, efficient application in the high technology realm within the monetary system, unless it was picked up by a country that wanted to utilize the resources only. I did an example of this in another talk recently, where I said maybe some country that's so deprived will conscript all resources. They'll have basically a mandate, a referendum for the community, and then they will utilize Latin America's great point because there's so many great resources there. It's great, quite the abundance. And they begin to construct a truly efficient, self-regulating system without the use of money, using resources. That's the best that I can see hope-wise. But developing just $100,000 to build a community, even if the values are there, then that'd be great. You could have like a kibbutz type of environment. They don't have money there. It's a community. And that's wonderful. They do exist already. They have in the past. Of course, the societies are less modernized, but they work and they're peaceful. That's different, based on what's really needed to support the entire human society with the efficiency, to really get the example out there. It's going to take a larger order program, which is why, as I mentioned earlier, the Global Redesign Institute shows it virtually. That's a great way to start doing that. And back to your first point regarding leaders, the reason I don't like that word fundamentally is not that I don't believe in authority and education, yet it means that somebody apparently knows everything. The assumption that you can give, I know it's semantic, but it means that this person can be followed and we don't have to think about it. That's the problem with the leadership concept, and that's why I don't like it. And it has all these other horrible attributes that go along with it that I won't even go into.
And the idea is, of course, to join a movement. It means, I guess, that people bring
people that come into the movement or any ideological subset, if you will, that frames people sharing values. For this, it's required that they can think. They're thinking forward, that they're going to contribute to be part of it, not just follow one individual or root for somebody.
It's dangerous, and history has shown that it doesn't bring any good to humanity.
If you want a free society, the society has to be educated to think for itself. Otherwise, it's going to be controlled from the top down.
The lady over here, please.
People that are religious about their money, people that are related to me, people that are very close friends, they listen, but then they just one ear right out the other. Is word of mouth the best that we can do, or is there certain thoughts that we should be interested in?
And I just want to say real quickly, that's a wonderful question, and I think that's the perfect question to end tonight's evening which is what I know, otherwise we'll be here until 1 a.m., which is ultimately at the core, what can we do today once we leave here today? What can we do starting now to make a difference?
Join the movement, right?
Well,
hack the TV networks.
But not everybody wants to join the movement.
The movement, in a sense, the movement has multiple layers. The movement, again, is a train of thought. It's a value identification. And it is, what am I doing? All I can really do is try to, through strategy, communication, whatever the medium may be, is communicate the ideas to plant the seed that others will build upon. And that sounds overly simplistic, doesn't sound very, doesn't sound like mechanistic in the sense of building something which is more visceral and sounds much more sexy than trying to change people's values. But until a tipping point of necessity hits, where people actually want this, where they're not going to endure by the system as it exists anymore, hence the beauty of the Occupy movement. It was just such a great uprising that even as disposed as it might be, it was such a wonderful expression of angst. And I was like, wow, which is exactly what I predicted at the end of the Zeitgeist Report, by the way, but I didn't expect it to happen just like that. And it's not going to stop.